Grand Council Chamber of Zephyrost stood as a testament to Sylphian artistry, its vaulted arches suspended high among the city's ethereal spires. The walls shimmered like woven strands of cloud and light, and the air carried the faint, sweet aroma of elderflower incense. Crystal lenses embedded in the ceiling scattered sunlight into soft, radiant beams, illuminating the assembly below. Yet for all its beauty, the chamber felt stifling to Eira, who stood in its center, every eye upon her, and not with kindness. The representatives sat in a crescent of elevated thrones, their faces a blend of indifference and thinly veiled scorn. Their robes, adorned with sigils of their noble houses, exuded refinement, but their condescension weighed heavier than their grandeur. Eira steadied herself.
The tremors along the northern ridgelines are worsening. Outpost reports confirm fractures in the cliffs. If left unchecked, the instability could threaten the foundation of Zephyrost itself.
Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Councillor of House Galanthir leaned forward, his voice laced with mockery.
Eira, is it? And what precisely do you suggest we do about a few distant quakes? The ridgelines are hardly our concern.
With respect, Councillor,
she replied, her tone measured.
They must be. The city's foundations depend on their stability. A collapse could trigger a cascade that reaches even Zephyrost.
Another waved her off.
Speculative nonsense. Those ridges have stood for centuries. If they were truly unstable, we would have noticed long ago.
Eira's gaze swept across the chamber, desperate for a flicker of support. She turned towards Councillor Serenthis of House Ilveris, seated at the far end of the semicircle. Unlike the others, his expression bore no mockery. His sharp eyes studied her, his hands steepled as if weighing her words. Yet he remained silent.
The outpost scouts are trained observers,
she countered, her voice rising slightly.
Their reports are consistent. This is not a minor issue, it's a warning.
Warnings are for alarmists.
Another councillor quipped with a smirk.
You were given this platform as a courtesy. Don't waste it on baseless fears.
The words stung, but Eira pressed on.
This isn't fear. It's foresight. Send a scouting party. One team, that's all I ask. If the tremors are nothing, then we've wasted only time. But if they're as dire as the reports suggest, then we may yet prevent disaster.
A tense silence filled the chamber. Finally, the silence was broken with a dismissive finality.
The council will deliberate on your request. You may leave.
Eira opened her mouth to protest, but caught herself. She knew a dismissal when she heard one. Bowing stiffly, she turned and left the chamber, her heart pounding with frustration. Outside, the wind was colder than she remembered. She stood on a narrow bridge overlooking the sprawling city below, its delicate towers glowing faintly in the fading sunlight. Her warnings had fallen on deaf ears, but she couldn't ignore the sense of foreboding that gnawed at her. If the council would not act, she would find another way. The tremors were more than the earth shifting. They were a prelude to something far greater, and Eira knew it was only a matter of time before Oriaphia felt the full weight of whatever was coming. The grove of Tir Naevon stretched before Brennath like a ghost of its former self. Once a sanctuary of life and vibrancy, it now lay choked by decay. The trees, gnarled and brittle, sagged under the weight of creeping vines, their bark oozing sap as black as tar. The air hung heavy with a sour tang, and the faint rustle of leaves felt more like a dying breath than a living sound. Brennath crouched near the base of an ancient elm, his fingers brushing the darkened soil.
"This shouldn't be happening,"
he muttered, tracing the cracked, withered roots. His sharp eyes darted upward, scanning the treetops for some sign, any sign, of what had gone wrong.
"Careful with that!"
A voice called from above, sharp and playful.
"She's got a nasty grip!"
Brennath jerked his head up, but before he could respond, a brittle vine sprang to life beneath him. Its thorny tendrils snaked around his ankle, pulling him down with startling force. He reached for the twin blades at his hip, but more vines erupted from the ground, wrapping his arms and pinning him flat. A laugh rang out, lilting and melodic.
Oh, this is rich. Didn't anyone ever teach you how to walk?
Twisting his neck, Brennath spotted her, a phaelette perched in the branches above, her fiery hair a tangle of wild curls that framed a freckled face. Green eyes, bright with amusement, danced as she took in the scene below.
Are you just going to sit there and mock me?
He growled, struggling against the vines. She leapt down in a single graceful motion, landing lightly beside him.
Hold still.
She said, drawing a small curved blade from her belt.
Struggling only makes them tighter.
Cursed vines,
He muttered under his breath.
that's new.
She grinned, crouching beside him.
Not just cursed, territorial. You're lucky they didn't drag you off to root you down for good.
With swift, practiced cuts, she sliced through the thorny tendrils, avoiding the barbs with ease.
Lucky for you, I'm here to save your sorry hide.
As the last vine fell away, Brennath sat up, brushing off dirt and inspecting the shallow scratches on his wrists.
Shoutout,
He muttered begrudgingly, noticing his broken cranmore lying on the ground, its antlers splintered like the dying branches of the grove.
Don't mention it.
She said, standing and sheathing her blade.
Though I'd love to know what brought you here to get yourself strangled by angry foliage.
Brennath rose to his feet, towering over her, but her confidence didn't waver.
I could ask the same of you.
He replied.
Simple.
She said, ticking off points on her fingers.
Something's killing this grove, and I'm gonna find out what. Can't exactly let the heart of Tuathlynn just rot away.
That's what I'm here for.
He said curtly, turning to leave.
Oh, I don't think so.
She said, stepping into his path.
You clearly need a guide, and since I just saved you from becoming mulch, I think that guide should be me.
He scowled.
I don't need...
Save it!
She interrupted, her grin widening.
You need me, and whether you like it or not, I'm coming.
She fell into step beside him as he sighed, his patience thinning.
By the way,
She said with a sly grin, glancing at him sidelong.
the name's Fenwin. You'll want to remember it.
Brennath sighed.
Fine, but stay out of my way.
Fenwin glanced over her shoulder, her eyes sparkling with mischief.
Wouldn't dream of it.
Brennath didn't respond, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just invited trouble. Yet, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, trouble might be worth the risk. The gates of the cathedral stood ajar, their once majestic iron bars twisted and warped by time and abandonment. Blackened vines clung to them, their brittle leaves curling like paper scorched by unseen flames. Corvan pushed the gate open, the rusted hinges releasing a groan that echoed across the desolate courtyard. The sound startled a murder of crows perched in the skeletal remains of a dying yew tree, their wings cutting through the stagnant air as they scattered into the ashen sky. The Cathedral of the Hollow Crown stood ahead, its dark spires clawing at the heavens like the ribs of some colossal, long-dead beast. Its splendor had been stripped away, the stone facade fractured and weathered by forces unseen. Once pristine carvings of saints and martyrs now bore hollow eyes and defaced visages, their features grotesquely distorted by heavy amounts of overgrowth. What had been a monument to faith now stood as a mausoleum of despair. Corvan's boots crunched against the gravel-strewn path, each step deliberate, his eyes scanning with the practiced precision of one who has crept in dark places. The double doors were scarred, deep gouges marring the wood, and faint scorch marks radiated outward in jagged, chaotic patterns. He brushed his gloved fingers across the damage, reading the story etched into the surface. This place had not been abandoned. It had been torn apart. Inside, the cold was shrilling, clinging to him like a shroud. The air reeked faintly of stale blood, metallic and sharp, as pale light filtered through the fractured stained glass windows, casting distorted and broken patterns on the stone floor. The pews were in ruins, some shattered, others missing entirely, leaving the nave a disordered graveyard of splintered wood. Yet the silence here was not empty. It was heavy, thick with a presence that pressed against the skin. Corvan approached the lead altar, his footsteps muted on the cracked stone. Behind it towered a monumental statue, partially veiled in shadow, its skeletal visage twisted unnaturally in the dim light, and for a moment it seemed alive, its hollow gaze fixed directly onto him.
Seeking absolution, relic hunter?
The voice emerged from the darkness, raspy and hollow. Corvan's hand instinctively brushed the hilt of his blade as a figure emerged, a Noctarch draped in tattered robes. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and ringed with shadow. The priest looked as though he had stepped from a grave, his movements slow and burdened by an invisible weight.
You don't look like someone who offers absolution,
Corvan said, his tone steady.
The Countess sent me. She said your order saw visions.
The priest's lips twitched, a grotesque mimicry of a smile.
We saw what no mortal should see,
He rasped.
the veil. It thinned, shadows walked where none should tread.
The priest's voice broke, his gaze lifting to the cathedral's vaulted ceiling.
He is unraveling, boundless, broken, in pain.
A guttural sound escaped his throat, raw and unnatural. His body trembled as he clutched the edge of a shattered pew, his breaths shallow and frantic. Corvan took an instinctive step forward, hand outstretched, but the priest recoiled as if burned, his sunken eyes blazing with unhinged fear.
You shouldn't be here,
The priest spat.
Whatever you're seeking, it's already too late.
The words seemed to drain the last of his strength. He stumbled backward, shadows swallowing his frail form as he retreated into the cathedral's vast, hollow depths. Then, from somewhere within the darkness, his voice rose again, fractured and distant, yet seething with dread.
They will break the world.
The silence that followed was suffocating, pressing against Corvan's chest like a phantom weight. He turned back toward the statue, but it did not look the same. For all his experience, for all the ruins and dark corners of the world he had seen, he found himself unsettled. He turned, stepping back through the heavy doors into the cold, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this place had witnessed something terrible, and whatever it was, it wasn't finished.